Thank you so much for attending my PowerPoint presentation on World of Warcraft's Forgotten Zones, the Shimmering Flats. This zone was located in the southern portion of Thousand Needles and functioned as World of Warcraft's premier salt flat racing destination. The Mirage Raceway featured an ongoing gnome versus goblin engineering rivalry, with quest chains involving rocket fuel components, racing park collections, and timed speed trials across the flats. The zone's defining characteristic was being almost completely horizontal. We're talking about a landscape so flat that it was essentially a texture file with collision detection enabled. The entire area was a barren salt desert with minimal elevation changes, making it one of the few zones in classic World of Warcraft where you could see the entire playable area from any standing position. Players love to reminisce about the racing quests, which is fascinating considering most of you never actually completed them. You picked up the rocket fuel quest, died to the local wildlife twice, and then left to go run Scarlet Monastery for the 14th time. When Cataclysm hit, Blizzard's solution to boring Flat Zone was to flood it entirely and replace land racing with boat racing. A lateral move in entertainment value, truly. Next up is what happened to the rest of Thousand Needles. Old Thousand Needles, pre-Cataclysm. Thousand Needles was a massive canyon featuring towering rock spires and winding ground-level paths threading between them. The zone's vertical design meant you were constantly questing at the bottom of these geological formations, with Free Wind Post serving as the primary horde hub perched on one of the accessible mesas. Ground level camps dotted the canyon floor, and the shimmering flats occupied the southern basin. Cataclysm flooded the entire lower canyon. The water level rose so dramatically that only the tips of the tallest rock spires remained visible above the surface. Free Wind Post was completely destroyed, the Tauren residents presumably having failed to invest in flood insurance. The zone's questing was converted to a boat-based hub system, replacing all that vertical exploration gameplay with the thrilling excitement of boat navigation. Players love to complain about this change, which is how you can identify people who never actually leveled through Thousand Needles in Classic. You ran through it once, got lost in the canyon maze, and then took the flight path out. The best part? The zone is called Thousand Needles, and Blizzard's design decision was to ensure you can only see approximately 12 of them. Moving on to another casualty of Blizzard's Cataclysm era hydrophilia, the original South Shore. South Shore was an alliance settlement in Hillsbrad foothills that served as a major quest hub and, more notably, the staging ground for one of World of Warcraft's most legendary PvP conflicts. The town sat directly across from Terran Mill, a horde village, creating the perfect conditions for what players remember as epic world PvP battles. These battles consisted of 40 people hitting each other in a field for 6 hours straight, dying repeatedly, and running back from the graveyard until someone's mom called them for dinner. Absolutely legendary gameplay. When Cataclysm arrived, Blizzard's narrative team looked at this ongoing conflict and decided the optimal resolution was chemical warfare. The Forsaken deployed plague gas across the entire town, killing everyone and transforming South Shore into the ruins of South Shore. The zone is now a Forsaken quest hub, featuring skeletal building remains and lingering plague clouds, because nothing says we won the war quite like rendering the territory permanently uninhabitable. Alliance players mourned the loss of this historic location, demonstrating that they genuinely forgot they only used South Shore to grief low-level horde players passing through. The town was improved by its complete annihilation, frankly. From coastal war crimes, let's move to catastrophic infrastructure failures. Pre-Cata Loch Moden, pre-Cataclysm, Loch Moden was a tranquil dwarven leveling zone centered around a massive lake and the stone rot dam that contained it. Thelsamar served as the primary quest hub, offering relatively peaceful questing through a scenic mountain valley. The zone featured the Valley of Kings, a dwarven burial ground with ancient tombs, and various camps dealing with minor trog incursions and wildlife management. The stone rot dam was a massive architectural feature that defined the zone's geography. It was called stone rot, specifically to communicate the durability and craftsmanship of dwarven engineering. So naturally, when Cataclysm hit, it immediately exploded. The dam's destruction flooded portions of the zone while simultaneously draining the loch itself, exposing the lake bed in certain areas. This is peak Blizzard logic. Flood some zones, drain others, just maximum water displacement across the continent. The Valley of Kings became partially submerged. Dark Iron Dwarves became more prominent in the redesigned quest flow, and the entire zone shifted from peaceful lakeside village to apocalyptic infrastructure failure survivor camp. Players mourned this change, though notably, they were more upset about the quest flow alterations than the thousands of dwarven civilians who presumably died in the catastrophic dam collapse. Dwarven engineering lasted almost as long as the game's beta period, from structural failures to islands that were structural failures from the start. The island of Dr. Lapidus, this unfinished island zone, was located south of the Tanaris coastline and could be reached through careful wall walking exploits and extended swimming in vanilla World of Warcraft. The zone was named after Dr. Lapidus, presumably a developer reference or placeholder name, and was clearly intended as some kind of quest location that never materialized beyond basic terrain generation. Players discovered this island through geometry manipulation and spent considerable time documenting its features. Those features consisted of basic ground textures, some grass, minimal elevation changes, and absolutely nothing else. No NPCs, no quests, no structures, no Dr. Lapidus. The doctor apparently never showed up for work, likely having quit during beta testing. The notable feature of this island is that it features nothing notable. It exists as a landmass, and that's the extent of its functionality. Yet members of the exploration community treated reaching it like an archaeological discovery, carefully documenting the exact exploit paths required to access 3 polygons with a grass texture applied. I have genuine respect for the dedication required to reach something this comprehensively disappointing. Hours of precise jumping, swimming beyond the fatigue zone boundaries, and coordinate mapping, all to confirm that yes, it's an empty island, exactly as suspected, from unfinished islands to islands that were explicitly disabled. Gilligam's Isle. Gilligam's Isle was a small island visible off the Tanaris coastline in vanilla World of Warcraft, but completely unreachable through normal gameplay. The island was named after Gilligim, a goblin NPC who does not exist on the island, in the game files, or apparently in any coherent development documentation. Congratulations to Gilligim on having an entire island named after him, while simultaneously not existing. The Isle was part of conceptual South Seas content that Blizzard planned but never actually implemented. Players could only reach it through exploits or by playing on private servers with modified boundaries, at which point they discovered it contained minimal terrain geometry, 2 palm tree models, and absolutely nothing else. No NPCs, no quests, no Gilligim, no content whatsoever. This didn't stop the exploration community from convincing themselves there must be secret content hidden somewhere on this rock. Data miners combed through the files and found absolutely nothing, which was somehow still disappointing given the time investment. The island remained visible from the Tanaris coast for years, serving no purpose except to torment players who could see it but not reach it. Blizzard left it there for the explicit purpose of being unreachable, which is honestly pretty funny. My condolences to Gilliam, who never got his island or his moment. From abandoned islands to abandoned battlegrounds. Azshara Crater. Azshara Crater was a planned battleground intended for the Azshara zone, with partially constructed assets and terrain existing in the game's alpha and beta files. The battleground was designed as a large-scale PvP environment, potentially similar to Alterac Valley in scope and mechanics, and would have been the first and only battleground located in Ashara. The zone never progressed beyond early development stages. Data miners occasionally discovered references to it in patch files, confirming its existence as a concept, but no playable version was ever implemented or tested on live servers. The assets were eventually scrapped entirely, leaving Ashara as one of the few zones in classic World of Warcraft with 0 instance PvP content. Blizzard's resource allocation strategy here is fascinating from an academic perspective. Why finish one battleground when you can start 3 different ones, complete none of them, and leave the player base speculating about what could have been? Extraordinary project management. The crater exists in name only, which is oddly appropriate for a battleground named after Queen Ashara, a character whose defining trait is narcissistic self-obsession. Even her scrapped content is appropriately self-referential. PvP players love to mourn this battleground that never existed, while actively avoiding queue times for Arathi Basin, a battleground that does exist and desperately needs players. The historical significance of things that didn't happen continues to fascinate the World of Warcraft community, from scrapped battlegrounds to scrapped expansion content. The Emerald Dream, unreleased. The Emerald Dream was a planned zone representing an alternate dimension where nature existed in its pure, uncorrupted form, essentially a blueprint version of Azeroth before mortal civilization ruined everything. This This druid-themed content was extensively data mined and discussed throughout Vanilla and the Burning Crusade, with partially constructed assets appearing in game files showing both corrupted and pristine sections. The zone would have featured major lore figures like Malfurion Stormrage and various dragon aspects, with quest lines involving the corruption of this natural paradise by the Nightmare. Players discovered these assets, posted about them on forums, and convinced themselves that the Emerald Dream was coming soon for approximately 2 decades. The dream, it turns out, was players believing Blizzard would actually release this content in a reasonable time frame. Druids treated this like the Half-Life 3 of World of Warcraft, maintaining unwavering faith in something that was clearly scrapped during early development. Blizzard's eventual solution was to release it 3 separate times as completely different things. The Emerald Nightmare raid arrived in Legion in 2016, featuring the corrupted version. Then the actual explorable Emerald Dream Zone was added in Dragonflight in 2023, 19 years after the original datamine files, and bore almost no resemblance to the planned content. Technically Emerald Dream content, legally speaking, from unreleased dream zones to alpha stage continents that got completely rebuilt. ALD Outland Alpha. The original Outland design discovered in alpha game files was radically different from the version released in the Burning Crusade. Rather than existing as a separate shattered continent in its own dimension, Alpha Outland was planned as a series of floating islands located above Azeroth itself, accessible through magical portals. The aesthetic was more ethereal and otherworldly, with architecture and zone layouts that bore little resemblance to the final product. This original concept was more faithful to Warcraft 2's Beyond the Dark Portal depiction, featuring a genuinely alien environment rather than the semi-familiar demonic wasteland we eventually received. The assets show completely different terrain geometry, structural designs, and environmental themes. Blizzard's design process here exemplifies what would become a recurring pattern. What if we scrap everything and start over? This is iterative design, which is corporate terminology for we had no idea what we were doing. From a physics perspective, both versions are equally nonsensical. Floating islands above Azeroth that somehow maintain atmosphere and gravity? Implausible. Exploded planet fragments held together in space by demonic magic? Also implausible. Players inevitably prefer whichever version they can't actually play because unavailable content is always superior to accessible content in the World of Warcraft community. The zone was rebuilt from scratch for the Burning Crusade expansion, rendering all alpha assets completely obsolete, from scrapped continents to islands that remained mythical for even longer. The original Dragon Isles. The Dragon Isles were referenced in vanilla World of Warcraft through NPC dialogue, quest text, and lore descriptions as the ancestral homeland of Azeroth's dragonflights. This mysterious location was always planned as future content, but remained unimplemented for 18 years. Data mined references and placeholder map files existed since the game's early development, fueling nearly 2 decades of player speculation and theory crafting about what this zone would eventually contain. Players constructed elaborate theories about the Dragon Isle's location, inhabitants, quest lines, and role in the overarching narrative. Every single one of these theories turned out to be completely wrong. When the Dragon Isles finally released as the Dragonflight expansion in 2022, the zone was entirely reimagined from its original concept. The initial vision presented the Isles as a hidden, mysterious location shrouded in secrecy and draconic magic. The final product is essentially a tourist destination where the dragons enthusiastically welcome adventurers to their secret homeland that they've been telling literally everyone about since 2004. An 18-year development cycle is a perfectly reasonable timeline for dragon-themed content, frankly. Blizzard treated this like the Phantom Menace of World of Warcraft zones. Decades of hype, endless speculation, and a final product that shares almost nothing with what was originally envisioned. My condolences to the lore theorists whose comprehensive predictions were systematically invalidated. From legendary mythical islands to deliberately hidden administrative zones, GM Island. GM Island was an inaccessible zone used by game masters for character testing, item verification, and administrative functions. Located far off the northwest coast of Kalimdor, well beyond normal map boundaries, the island featured featured several buildings, vendor NPCs for testing purchases, training dummies for combat mechanics, and various developer Easter eggs, including joke NPCs with humorous dialogue. The island was partially visible on the world map, which naturally fueled intense player curiosity about what game masters were doing in their secret hideaway. Players used increasingly sophisticated exploits and hacks to reach the island, discovering that it contained approximately 3 buildings, some training dummies, and an overwhelming sense of accomplishment at having accessed forbidden content. Blizzard's response to players reaching GM Island was swift and unambiguous: permanent account bans. This did not deter the exploration community, who apparently calculated that risking hundreds of hours of character progression was absolutely worth it to see what amounts to a parking lot with testing equipment. Game masters needed a safe space away from the players they were ostensibly employed to assist, which is understandable given player behavior. The island was more exclusive than any actual in game achievement, title, or mount, making it the ultimate status symbol for approximately 48 hours before your account was terminated. The island's functionality was eventually moved to separate developer realms in later expansions. From administrative hangouts to pure developer testing environments, a Programmer Isle. Programmer Isle was an ultra hidden developer testing zone, even more restricted than GM Island, containing the absolute minimum required for internal feature testing. The Isle is a generous term for what's essentially a flat plane with geometric primitives placed on it. We're talking cubes, spheres, flat ground textures, and placeholder assets that represent the most basic dev art possible. This zone was used for internal testing of new items, mechanics, and features before they were properly textured and implemented. Players who reached it through severe exploits or data mining discovered prototype versions of future content that looked like a PlayStation 1 tech demo. Literally nothing of gameplay value existed here, just testing infrastructure designed to be maximally boring and functional. The zone is technically an island in the same way a cardboard box is technically architecture. It exists in 3-dimensional space and has collision detection. Those are its qualifications. Players use complex geometry exploits to access this developer environment, treating the discovery like finding Atlantis when they actually found a warehouse. The historical significance of test cubes and placeholder spheres cannot be overstated, which is to say, it can and should be completely unstated. The excitement of seeing future content that consists of a purple cube labeled item underscore test underscore 01 is apparently worth risking account termination. Extraordinary community priorities. In conclusion, World of Warcraft's Forgotten Zones represent lost history that nobody actually misses, and you should absolutely play it. If you enjoyed this PowerPoint presentation, I made others, and you should absolutely check them out. Peace on planet Earth.